What's up guys, welcome to the WIX Club. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make an advanced multi-step form in your WIX website. Now you may have forms already, maybe a contact form or maybe an application form, and you want people to be able to fill out certain information such as the personal details and more. But then you want to separate these pages. Maybe for personal details you want to be on a separate page, and we want the address to be on a separate page, and you want maybe different information to be on a separate page. And I'm going to show you how to achieve that in this video. Now before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Make sure you click on the subscribe and hit the notification bell in order to receive notifications when I post the next video. Now there are awesome videos here, you can check them out as you wish, and you can also make use of the code and visit my website over here at Contact Me, and this is where I keep most of my blogs. Alright, so visit the tutorial section and you can find a lot more tutorials for you. You can also go over to the playground, which is a new page I just added. Now this is a place where I add so many amazing features that you can go ahead to copy the code and then incorporate exactly what you see on this page. Alright, so let's get started. So the first element that we want to add into this page is the multi-stateBox element. Alright, so to find that element, you're going to head over to the plus and then you're going to go to the interactive. Now it's supposed to appear somewhere here at the boxes, but it does not appear because the multi-stateBox element is a Velo element. So to show that in your add or your element section, you need to come over to your dev mode and make sure that it's turned on. You can see that the code section, the code panel appears, and we have the Velo left bar or sidebar appeared over here. Alright, so let's get back to our plus, and you're going to see that under the boxes our multi-state box has appeared. Now what we need to do now, you can see there are many other designs that we can make use of, but I'm going to go with the blank one because I want to customize this to my taste. And I'm going to go ahead to customize this element to how I want it to look like. Alright, so this is how I want my box to look like. It looks very plain and very bland for now because we haven't added any elements on it yet. So what I want to do is I want to show a category of different information that I want to be displayed for the front page and then the other pages. Now one of the tricks that you may want to know about the front or the multi-state box is that you can actually create more pages inside of it or state. Alright, so over here you can see that you can actually change the ID. So for here I'm going to call this the personal details, which is the ID that I want it to be, and then I'm going to hit the enter or press done if you want that, and then you can go ahead to add or duplicate. So if you go ahead to add, there are going to be more pages that we can make use of. Alright, so I'm going to delete these for now because I want to maintain a particular sequence of design later on. So what I want to do is to start adding my form element into this. I want to reduce these a little bit because I don't want to have so much space, and then I want to start adding my impute elements. Now first of all, the impute element also is a Velo feature, so what you need to do also is to turn on your dev mode to access all of the impute menu. Alright, so here I'm going to add the box element. This is going to be like the impute. I'm going to add as many as I need for personal information, such as the name, maybe the date of birth, and I'm going to add a few other information. So I'm going to do that right now. Alright, so I'm done with the design of this section. If you preview this, you can see that we've added a number of amazing features on it, so you can see how amazing this looks like. Now what I want to do now is to duplicate these impute element for other sections that I want to add. Now before we get started with that, I want to first of all add the field title. Over here I'm going to say first name. Alright, so the field title is what shows the user what they need to add. So what I want to do now is to customize how the text looks over here at the customization, and under the text you can see from here that we have the field title, and then we have the field title color. We can change the field title color to maybe black, and then the required, which is the star over here, we can make it to be red. Now that should be that color because it catches the intention of the reader, and let's change the text to be as the same as what we have as the input text. Now that is all we need to do for that section. We can go ahead to duplicate, so you can bring out the toolbar and then click on this little icon over here, or you can simply press the Ctrl D on your keyboard and you can duplicate these as many times as you want. Now I want to duplicate these for other sections, which is called, let's say, last name, and then we're going to also duplicate that, and then let's say the email. All right, so I'm going to change this to enter email. And then for over the field type, what field is this? This is an email field, so I'm going to change this to email field. So this is going to deal with the validation of this field. So if the content that is being inserted into this text box is not an email, it's going to throw an error until it becomes an email. All right, so I'm not going to go so much into many details. This is just going to be the front section, which is the personal information or personal details. So I'm going to make that, I'm going to add something that can actually show that it is actually a personal details section. So I'm going to add this little box over text over here. I'm going to say personal details. All right, so that is just enough for now. I'm going to make that bold and maybe underline that, and that is just fine. All right, so you can go ahead to do these to as many as you want. You can customize this to your best taste, but this is just how I'm going to leave it. Now what I want to do now is to manage my states, and I want to duplicate this state. Now the reason is because I want to keep using this format. I'm going to use the text box, and I don't want to design them over and again. So just hit on duplicate state, and that state has been duplicated. Now next I'm going to change this to address field. I'm going to change this to address details. This is going to be the ID of this state, so it's different from this one. So in a while I'm going to show you how that works. So I'm going to change this content here to address details. All right, so for over here we can say enter address, or let's just say the address, and then hit the enter, and then here we can just say maybe something that they can use to know what address to put. So we can put number 2 Baker Street. All right, I'm not sure if that format is correct, but they will get the idea. And then let's move forward. So it's still a text field because we are adding the, so we're going to use states. So let's say state, and then enter state, enter state. And then this is a text field as well. We can go ahead to get rid of the email, and then simply duplicate these states text box by clicking on this duplicate icon, and then we can come over here and actually change this to country. Now if you already have maybe you want to use a drop down, you can also do this with a drop down. If you want to add all the countries in a drop down, you can do so over here. All right, so I'm going to say this enter country. So I want them to manually enter the country, and that is just fine. Now if you don't want the country and the state to be required fields, so that when you submit or click on the submit, it doesn't throw an error, you can get rid of that by pressing the required field. So you can get rid of the required, then when they submit this section here is just fine. Now there are other options that I'm going to explain to you later on as we go further. Now the final item that I want to add for the address is the zip code. So I'm going to come over here and duplicate this section, and I'm going to call this the title should be zip code, and I'm going to come over here and say enter zip. All right, so that makes sense. Let's change this to uppercase. That's better. All right, we have one more section to go, and let's see what we can add. So first of all, we need to duplicate this section. As always, we're going to duplicate here, and we're going to say maybe other information or other details. So I'm going to say this is other details, and these details is going to include employment status. So let's say employment status. So this is going to show them if they're employed or not. Maybe we can use a drop down for this. So I'm going to go ahead to get rid of these elements over here, and I'm going to go back to my input, and then under the selection I'm going to head to the drop down. So I'm going to click a drop down right here, and I'm going to customize this drop down to be exactly the way my text elements are. Alright, So I have a drop down element that has the same look as my text input elements. I'm gonna go ahead as well to change or add the title over here. So here I'm gonna call this the employment status. All right, I'm gonna call that the employment status. All right, so this is also like a required field, so I'm gonna go ahead as well here to say select status. All right, so that already is good. I'm going to also change the design of the title text because it has a different font from the rest of my form, so I'm going to change that to something just like that. And then the required also should be red. As you can see, it's red. Okay, so I'm going to change that to something similar to my other the color of my other elements. Okay, so next we're going to change or add the values, or we're going to add the options for the implement status. So we're going to say employed. We're just going to use two options, employed or not employed. It's as simple as that. We can do other things later on. So here I'm going to say not employed. I'm going to copy that into the value and say not employed. All right, so we're done with that section. And then next we're going to say let's say that we want to add a section. If they are employed, we want this field to show. If they are not, this field will be hidden. So what we want to do here is to add a field like current employer. All right, so we're going to do the current employer. So we're going to say enter employer's name. So this field is going to show if the option is selected here is employed, and it's going to hide if it is not. All right, so what I'm going to do here is, first of all, I'm going to change these. I'm going to leave these as required, and I'm going to go over to the properties panel for this element, and I'm going to say that is hidden, or let's say collapsed on load. All right, so if it's collapsed on load, then all the elements beneath it are going to go up and the space is going to be hidden. All right, so you can see that element is collapsed on load. The next thing that we want to do is that we want to say the driver's license. Let's first of all, we're going to also let's go ahead to write that, the driver's license. Driver's license. All right, enter driver's license. Okay, so these are all the information that I'm going to add for this section. We are already done with adding all the inputs. As you can see, we have a number of items here, pages. I'm going to add one last page, and this page is the success page. Now, if they have submitted their items and their items are successfully submitted, then this is where we're going to add it. But first of all, I'm going to come over here to change the ID to success, or let's say submit success. All right, so the ID has been changed, and what I want to do is to customize this page. I'm going to add something that makes sense. I'm going to add like a decorative. Let's go ahead over to decorative, and let's add some icons, maybe a success icon. So I'm going to use this trophy to say that it's been submitted successfully. I'm going to change the color to blue, and I'm going to add a text element. So you can go ahead to customize this as much as you want to do so, and it doesn't really matter what designs you have. You can just go ahead to make use of the section later on in your code. Now what we're going to do now is to say item successfully submitted. I'm going to add this maybe in a green color because that actually symbolizes that it was a success. Now that doesn't look so good, so I'm going to reduce that a little bit. It's something like that. This is better, and then I'm going to make that bold. So this is just all I'm doing over here. Now that has been centered to the very center of this state. So we have added multiple states. We have the first state, second state, the third state, and then the final state. Now, very importantly, before we start adding other amazing cool features, I'm going to add a button here. Now we're going to add two buttons. The button, first of all, is going to go to the next state, and then the button that's going to bring it back to the previous state. So I'm going to add the first button over here, and I'm going to change a little bit. I'm going to customize this a little bit. So I'm going to change that to next, and then this is going to take us to the next page. As you can see, that really looks cool. And I'm going to copy these elements to the next state because I want to make use of these the same button design for the rest of the pages. So this is also going to be next, and then I want to duplicate these as well, and I'm going to bring it right over here. Now we want to also go back to the previous page if we have already moved forward. So I'm going to customize that a little bit and change the color. Let's say something, maybe just a white, maybe darker color. Let's see. Maybe we can make use of this color, and same goes to the hover. All right, so this is going to be called previous. All right, so that makes sense already, and I'm going to go ahead to, first of all, let's align these elements. They don't look so aligned, so I'm going to head over to the here at the align section, or here. All right, so let's go over to the distribute, and I want to distribute these things vertically. As you can see, that has been adjusted. All right, so everything has equal height, and they are equal in distance from each other. So let's group these elements together, and we can go over here to copy them. So click on that, or you can simply click on the Control C or Command C on Mac. All right, so let's come over here and paste the same option. All right, so that looks good. Let's also center or distribute these evenly. All right, that makes sense, and let's drag this one a little bit up and here. All right, so next we're going to go to the final state. We don't need to do this for add any button here, or we can still go ahead to add a button here. All right, so the button that we're going to add here is going to take us back to the front page by the time we are done. So we're going to say submit again. All right, so that makes sense. So we're going to drag these out a little bit and then center that to the center, align that to the center. Maybe let's do that for the entire form, and there we go. So this makes a lot of sense. Now the final thing or design that we want to add before we start moving into the code is we want to add a progress bar. Now when the user goes to the next page, we want to show a bar that shows that they've gone forward to the next step and so on. Now before we add that, you can see that we have 4 steps. All right, so that means that we're going to be adding 4 steps on our progress bar. But then let's move forward. Let's head over to the add a progress bar, and under the interactive, you can see that indicators, we have something called a progress bar. Now this is the best use of that, so I'm going to drag one of these into my page. I kind of like this one, so I'm going to drag this one into my page. So I'm going to drag that across the same weight as my multi-state element or box. I want to add a button that indicates what number or the number of the position I am currently in my form. So I'm going to change this one, let's say 1, and then I'm going to customize this a little bit. All right, so as you can see, I have this cute little button over here, and I'm just going to add that to the top side of my progress bar. Now we need to do 4 of these because we have 4 sections. So I'm going to just go ahead to duplicate these, and let's say I'm going to add these to the end, or let's say here, and then we can go ahead to duplicate that again, and then we're going to duplicate that again for the final step over here. All right, so what we want to do is to distribute these horizontally. As you can see, they're in horizontal layout, so I'm going to distribute that horizontally so you can see that centers it properly. Now we're going to see how this progress bar is going to move across as we move to the next state, or when we are active on a specific page. Now we're going to change these to the different sections that we have, to the different steps that we have. All right, since we have 4 states, we want to let the user know where they currently are and if they are almost done filling out the form. Now this is pretty amazing. You can go ahead to add more text. So let's say we're going to add a text over the buttons. So we have a text here that says start, or we can just indicate what you're doing. For example, we have the personal details. All right, so I'm just gonna put that there, and I'm going to use a different font, and I'm going to reduce the font size of that to something like that. and that makes a lot of sense. So that looks good. So we can go ahead to change or resize that and then duplicate these for the next one. All right, so this one, if I remember correctly, this is the address. All right, address details. So we have another one. We can go ahead to do that and align that carefully and call these other details. All right, and then we can duplicate for the final section, which is the completed section. So what we're going to do is completed. We're going to add completed, and then that is awesome. So I'm going to change the color so that makes sense over there. Now they know where they are and they know where to go to. We're also going to automate these buttons so that they can go to and fro from any of these fields, from any of these states. They can switch states from just clicking on those buttons. So the next thing we want to do is to connect these to our database. Now we have no database yet, so we want to save this content into our database. First of all, we're going to head into our databases at the Velo sidebar, and we're going to create ourselves a new database. So we're going to click on the plus sign over there and new collection, and we're going to call this start creating. We're going to call this form submission, or we're going to call this job application. All right, so we're going to call that a job application, and then let's set the permissions for this. So we're going to go to the custom use, and then we're going to set the permission. So who can read content from here? We only want the admin to be able to read the content over here, and we want anyone, even though you're a site member or not a site member, to write or create content or submit with a form. And who can update these? We only want the admin to be able to do this, and we also want the admin to be able to delete the content. Now this makes a lot of sense. Now, anyone can create, anyone can submit, but only the admin can actually make use of the data being submitted. Let's go ahead and set and create collection. All right, so we have our amazing and clean collection being created, and over here we want to do a little bit of customization. First of all, we have the first name. We're going to add a first name, and we're going to save that. All right, and as you can see, we don't need this title field, so I'm going to make the first name the primary field, and I'm going to get rid of the title field. Cool. Now let's add the last name, and we're going to hit the enter to save and continue. And we have the email. The email is actually URL, but we can leave it as a text element, so we can actually let's just use a URL for the burst performance. So let's add the other one, which includes the address. Now since I don't know what fields, I can't remember all the fields I created, I can do that from the front end. So let's head back into our page. We've added the first name, last name, and the email. Let's head over to the second section, which is the address. Now over here you can see that we haven't changed the ID, so I'm going to go there in a minute. So we have the address field. This is correct. Now we have the state. Since we don't have a state, I'm going to first of all head back to the first page, and then I'm going to add a data set. So a data set is the glue that connects your content to your database or your collection. Now that will help you save content easily without having to write a single line of code. So when you add your data set, head to the settings, and then we're going to customize or save the settings. So we have here, this is the title or the name of our recently created database. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to make these a write only collection data set. So users can only create, but they cannot read from it. All right, so let's start connecting our items. First of all, we have the first name, and the first name is going to be connected to our field called the first name field, and then the last name is going to be connected to our last name field, and then the email is going to be connected to our email field. That's beautiful. Now next, let's go to the address section. We have already created a field for our address, so it's going to be connected to our address section. Now we didn't create for the text or for the states, but we can do that from here. Since we don't have any item for state, we can add a new collection field. So we're going to add a new one, as you can see that pops up, and we're going to call that state. So the ID is being created and the text field is, the field type is a text. So add that. Our state has been created. Now let's add the one for the country. Let's save or create a field for a country, and here we have country as the field. Now let's click on the add. That has been created quickly, and we have another one which is the zip code. So since we don't have a field, we're going to go ahead to create a new one, and we have the zip. Now the zip could be, depending on the country, could be a number or a mixture of text and number, so we're going to leave that as a text. Now let's move over to the other details. So over here I'm going to change the ID to other details. Alright, that's amazing. Now we're going to create or connect this to our employment status. So we're going to say the value connects to employment status. So we're going to leave this as a text field, and that's been created. And we're also going to create or add a field for our current employer. That's amazing. And then finally we have our driver's license. Now we're going to add a new field called the driver's license. Alright, so we're going to leave that as a text element. Now before we continue, I'm going to change this next button to be called submit. Now we're also going to change the look so that the user can actually see that it looks different from the rest of the buttons. When they get here, they know they have to submit this button. So these changes has been applied to all the other sections, which is the hover and the disabled, so that works perfectly. Now our form has been created. Let's preview that for a while. Now you can see how beautiful that looks. Alright, so now we can actually head into our code section. So come over here and then let's maximize this. We're going to get rid of a lot of things that WIX have added over here, and this is good. All right, and then for this section as well. Now the first thing that we want to do here is to actually enable the progress bar. So we have a progress bar which is actually set to a target of 100. So we have the target value. The target value is actually the value across the progress bar itself. So we have from here which starts at 1 up to 100. So then we have 4 sections. So if we divide 100 by 4, that is going to give us 25. So that means that for each state that we are going to add 25, or if we go back, we're going to subtract 25. Now that's going to be easier in a few seconds. Now what we're going to do over here is we're going to automate all the buttons that goes to the next page and the buttons that goes back to the previous page. Now we have, first of all, we have the next button. To make it easier to understand, I want to change this ID to next button 1. So I'm going to copy the next first of all, because I'm going to repeat that for the rest of the ID. So we have the next button 1. All right, and then we have the other one. Let's go forward to the next one, which is next button 2. All right, and I think that is all the next buttons that we have, and that is correct. Now we're going to also do the same thing for the previous button. So we're going to also call these the previous button, and I'm going to call that previous button 1 because it's the first button that goes that is the previous button. And finally we have the other button, which is the previous button for previous button 2. Now that makes sense. Now we have this submit button, so we're going to call that submit button. Now that is great. And then finally we have a button at the back, which is the submit or submit again button. We're going to call that submit again button. This will help us to understand what we're working with and how we can move forward quickly and easily. And then we also need to change the button IDs of these pretty looking buttons. So we're going to call that button 1. We're going to call this button 2. finally button 4. So we're done with this section, and then let's start writing the code. Now the first thing that we want to do is we want to recognize what our multi-state box is called, and here we have the ID of our multi-state box. So it's called stateBox 8, but that doesn't really sound so good, so I'm going to change that to job multi-state box. And that is pretty amazing, and it's easier to understand. So we have our first button, which is the next button. So what I want to do over here is that I want to call the ID of our next button. What I want to do is when I click on this button, I want to be able to actually move to the next state. So what I want to do here is bring in the ID of my state element, and then I want to say that this element, which is a multi-state, I want it to change state to the next state. So this button is going to go to the next state. It's going to bring our multi-state to the next state. So the next state over here, as you can see, is called the address details. So I'm going to click on that, and I want to copy the state ID from here, and I'm going to insert that right over here. So that section is all done. All right, now we can move on to the next one. All right, so the next buttons that we're going to be working with is the next button 2. All right, so the next button 2 over here, we're going to come over there, and let's start writing the same thing. Now I want to write this over again because I don't want to have spot up a confusion. So we have the next button 2, which is over here. The ID is called next button 2. So copy that into the code, and then when we click on this, also when we click on this button, what we want to do is to be able to also bring our multi-state element, which is called the job multi-state element, and we want to change the state to the next state after the button, which in this case is called other details. So the ID of our state is called other details, and we're going to bring that right over here. All right, so that is very amazing, and then we are done adding the buttons for the next buttons. So now we're going to move to the previous buttons. All right, so remember we have our previous button starting from the address details. So we have our previous button 1. Don't worry if this is confusing. You can always rewatch the video over and over, and you can make use of this code anytime. I'm going to write a blog about this, so you can always visit that. Now we have written our sections for the next buttons. Now we are going to write for our previous buttons. So I'm going to change the ID of our first previous button, which is found on our address state. Now this button is going to bring us back to the personal details, okay, state, the personal details state. So what we're going to do is that our multi-state box is going to change the ID to our personal details state. Now we're done with the first previous button. Now we're going to go to the last previous button, which is over here. All right, and that is called previous button 2. So I'm going to copy the same code over here, and I'm going to bring that down. And since we have previous button 1 and previous button 2, we're going to put the previous button 2, which brings us to the previous state. In this case, since this button is on our other details state, it's going to bring us back to the address details. So what I'm going to do now is to head to the address details itself, and I'm going to copy the address details state ID and paste it right here. All right, so that makes sense. Now what I want to do now is to preview this state. So as you can see, our field looks as the same. If we click on that, you see that works. We can go back to the first state. We can continue moving like that to the last state. So we can go back to previous and so on. Now this is almost done, guys. All right, so the next thing we want to do is that we want to use the same buttons, these buttons, to also control the state that we are currently on. Now before we move forward, I want to be able to show you that this button doesn't really need to work because it is the final state. All right, so what we're going to do over here is all the buttons will be disabled until they have clicked on the next button. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to disable all the 3 buttons. So let's go ahead to disable them. We're going to click over here, which is enabled on load. There shouldn't be enabled, and so on. So the next thing that we want to add over here is that we want to add the states. We're going to move the state. When we click on these buttons, they're also going to bring us to the current state that they indicate. So this is button 1 should bring us the details state. So what we want to do is to add a comment to our code to be able to indicate where we are. So this is going to be the progress buttons. All right, so the progress buttons, the first one, which is called the button 1, we want to be able to say that when we click on this button, we want to change our multi-state element to display in our first state, or first state in our multi-state element. All right, so what we're going to do is to get the ID of our first state, which is over here. As you can see, this is the first state and the ID is called personal details. So I'm going to go ahead to copy the ID of our first state. I'm going to add that over here. All right, so that section is done. And then for the next section, which is the button 2, we're going to also say the same thing. When we click on the button 2, you can see that the ID is button 2. Just change the ID from here, and we want the button 2 to bring us to the second state, which is called the address details. So I'm going to go ahead to copy the state ID of our address details field and paste that there. And I'm going to do the same thing for button 3. So as you can see from button 3, we're going to bring our ID, or we're going to bring our multi-state element to the third state of, or ID of the third state. So we're going to go to the third state, which is called other details. I'm going to head into the properties panel and copy the ID of our third state and paste that right there. Now that section is all done. All right, so moving forward, what we want to do here is, as we click on the forward or the next or previous button, we want to also automate our progress bar. Now we know our progress bar isn't moving yet, so what we want to do now, as you can see, the target value is 100. So I'm going to leave it at 100. That makes a lot of sense for me, so I'm going to leave that at 100 so that when they move to the next state, we're going to cover the first 25 miles until we get to 100. All right, so what we're going to do is, for the next button, when we click on the next button, we want to cover our first 25. So we're going to change the value of our progress bar to 25. So if you remember, our next button is over here. So I'm going to add the code just inside the onClick function, and I'm going to call the ID of my progress bar, which is progress bar 1. And then I'm going to say the value is going to be equal to 25. All right, so that is great. That is awesome. And then I want to do something over here. I want to add a comment also to say previous buttons. This will help us to separate what we are trying to do, because we still have more codes to write, and it's going to be a bit confusing if we're going to leave all the codes just running around without being properly labeled. For our next button, we have increased our target to be 25, and then we have also the other details. So it brings us here, it brings us to the address field, and we have next button 2. Now the next button 2 is supposed to also bring it to another 25 miles. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this code and we're going to add it over here. We're going to add another 25 to the 25 we have, and then that's going to be 50. All right, so that makes a huge lot of sense. Now let's preview this for a moment. So when we head here and we click on next, you can see that moves 25, and that doesn't really look so good because there's space between here. What I wanted to do was to bring this over here and then maybe this over here. So let's continue. You can see that it's a little bit short, so we're going to take that back a little bit. So for this case, I'm going to change the values from 25. Let's try 35, and then let's try 65 over here. So this should be able to solve the problem a little bit. So let's preview that and see. Great, so that brings it right to this section, and when we press the next one, it brings it again to this section. Now this is amazing. Now what we're going to do again is we're going to work with the previous buttons as well. Now, since the first previous button, which is over here, the first previous button, first of all, let's copy this code for our progress bar. The previous button is right here at the address field. So this previous button is going to bring us back to the personal details. When it brings us to the personal details, we do not want to move our progress bar. So we're going to set the value of our progress bar to 0. So I'm going to bring that over here, and we're going to set our progress bar to 0. All right, now for the next previous button, which is here, this is the second previous button 2, is going to bring us back to address details. All right, so the address details is right over here, so that's supposed to bring us to our first value, which is 35. So we're going to bring that, add that there, and then we're going to change the value to 35. Now let's test this out and see how that works. So we have our next, that moves fine. We have our next also. When we move back, it's going to bring us back to this section, and then finally that way to our first section. Is this not amazing? This is really cool, and this is just what we wanted to achieve. Now next, what we're going to do is that we are going to add the submit button. Since we've added all the code, we've connected our items to submit our buttons easily. Now we're going to do something. After the submission has been successful, we want to be able to move to the completed state. All right, so we're going to use a simple code. Now before we jump into that section, we're going to add the progress bar interaction for these buttons as well. All right, so we have the buttons, we have those buttons working. Now this is our button 1. All right, button 1 is here and it's supposed to bring us to our first page. So that means our progress bar value should be set to 0. So we're going to do that right here, which is set to 0. All right, now we have the button 2. The button 2 here is the address details. Now the address details is going to bring us right here. So our progress bar should be set to 35. All right, so I'm going to bring that there to 35. Awesome. Now we have the progress, we have the button 3 as well. The button 3 is going to bring us to the other details. So the other details is right here, which is going to bring our progress bar to this section, which is 65, like we have used just right here. So we're going to copy this code for our 35, our 65, and paste it there. Awesome. So our form is beginning to look very interactive. All right, so here we have all these. Remember that we've disabled these buttons. So what we're going to do is that when the user clicks on next and we appear on the address field, this button will be enabled. All right, and when we go to the other field, the button also will be enabled. All right, so what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to enable these two buttons when we get to their respective destinations. So the code is beginning to look very bulky, but do not worry, I have added the description. So as you can see, what we want to do is when we press on the first next button, which is right here, it's going to bring us to the next state, right? It's going to bring us to the next state. So we're going to be able to enable this button here at the first next. So what we're going to do here is to add the ID of our first button. Sorry about that. Let's remove the caps lock. We're going to add the ID of our button 2 and we're going to enable button 2. So we're going to say enable when we click on the next button. All right, so we're going to also enable button 3 when we click on this next button 2. All right, so let's come over here and we're going to enable button 2. All right, so that makes a lot of sense. Now let's test this out and see how that works. Our code is looking all amazing. If you click on the next, you can see that that is beautifully done, and you can see that our buttons, this button has been enabled, this one hasn't been enabled. So I think we need to check out why this button has not enabled this one. All right, so that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to check out why next button 2, which is right over here. So let's check out why. All right, so I see why that was wrong, because we're going to enable, we added button 2 here, so the ID should be button 3 because we're trying to enable button 3. All right, so let's test that out before we move on to the next step. All right, so these buttons are disabled on load, only this is enabled. So we click on next, this is enabled, and we can go back there and we can move forward, and we click on next, this is enabled. So we can go back here, we can come back here, we can go back to the first step, and we can go back to the next step. And you see how interactive the progress bar works. All right, So now we did something previously. If you remember, we added something, a field here, which shows that if our employment status is employed, then we want to show a field, but if it is not, then we want to hide it. All right, so let's head over to the other details, which is, as you can see, is the current employer. All right, so what I want to do is to work with this drop down. So I'm going to go to my ID again. I want to change the ID to employment status. All right, I'm going to change that to employment status, and I'm going to come right down. So I'm going to cover this code so that we don't move or get too distracted. So I'm going to change this to employment status. All right, so what I want to do here is on the InChange event for my drop down for the employment status, I want to be able to get the value of the onChange event. All right, so over here, what I want to do is I want to get the value. First of all, let's save the value of our employment status. And then I want to insert, I want to add a variable to it. So let's say let employee status equals this. All right, so we've saved all these long text into one simple variable. Now we're going to be working with employee start from now on. All right, so still inside of our onChange event, we're just going to go some steps below. So over here, we're going to do a simple conditional statement to get the value of our items. So we're going to say that if our employee status, which is the value, is equals to, it's a string in our drop down. So we're going to get the value of this. So we're going to get the value, copy the value here. If it is employed, if the user selects employed, then what do we want to do? If the user selects employed, then we want to expand this field. All right, so I'm going to go over to my code, and here we have the impute, the ID of this impute, current employment. We're going to change that to current employer. So I'm going to change that to current employer. I'm going to copy the ID. I'm going to bring it over here, and I'm going to say that the current employer dot expand. All right, so that is going to expand if the value selected is equal to employed. And then we're going to do else if, or we're just going to say else, because we know that these items can always change. So I'm going to get rid of this section. And here. All right, else we want this employers this field to be collapsed. All right, so we want that field to be collapsed. And I'm going to show you how that works. So let's preview this and then let's see. So we have next, and then we come over here. You can see we cannot find the current employer, but when we change that and choose employed, it's going to come out again. And when we remove not employed, it's going to be hidden. Now remember that this current employer is required field. So even though it is a collapsed field, it is still required. So what I want to do is, if the employed is being selected, then this field is going to be required. If it is not employed, then it's not going to be required. This will affect us when we're trying to submit. So we need to make sure that the validation is correct. So what I want to do here now is to head to that section, which is the other details. Click on this, and then we're going to add a little validation. So what we're going to do here is we're going to copy this section, which is the code for our current employer. If the user select that he is employed, then we want to make sure that the current employer field is required, and it's a boolean, so we're going to say it's equal to true. All right, so we're going to make that true if he is employed. And what we're going to do next is, if they choose that he is not employed, then we're going to make that field to be false. Now we are almost done with this tutorial. All right, so before we move forward to the texting, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the user actually finishes filling up a page or a state before moving to the next stage. All right, so for each of these buttons, we're going to add validation for these three values. So we're going to change, first of all, let's change the IDs of these elements. We're going to change the first one, which is the first name. We're going to change that to first name, and then we're going to change the second one to the last name. and then we're going to change the email to email, so that's just going to be email. All right, so what we're going to do next is that when we click on this, before this next, we're going to also disable this button. So we're going to disable that. Let's change the color of a disabled button to, let's say over here, let's change it to something gray. Now this button is going to be disabled until the user has met the validations or met the requirements to move forward. And the first method to do that is if these fields have been filled up. Let's move down a little bit, and then we're going to name a different section, and we're going to call this validation. Let's just call it validation. So I'm going to add a little bit warning sign here to know that this is actually a very serious step to take. All right, so what we want to do is we want to say that for all the elements which we have, for example, we have the first name, all right, and then we have dot value, then we have dot length. All right, so we're going to get the length of the value. If there's the value inside of our field, then we want the buttons to be enabled. All right, so we want to get the length of the value if this value is greater than 0. Okay, then that means that we can move forward. But this is not just how the code is going to look like, of course. So here we're going to name a conditional statement. So we're going to say that if, so here this is where we then bring in our value. We're going to add this into our conditional statement, and then we say and, because we want to make sure that all the items are actually valid, all of them have length greater than 0. So we have the first name, and then we also have the last name, the second drop down, the second input, which is right here, and then the final one is the email. So we're also going to add the email, and here we're going to come over here and change that to the email as well. So we're going to say that if the email also length is greater than 0, and then what do we want to do? We want to enable our next button 1. So this button will be disabled until our inputs have been added. Now I'm going to do this for just this page. Then you can go ahead to use that for your other pages. Okay, so the final step to do this is that we want to make sure that when we start to type in our values, for example, we start to type in our first name, so we're going to use the onChange function for this section. So when we start to change our values, then we want the conditional statement to be checked if it is correct that these items are working. But then we don't want to only change the first name, we also want to change the last name and then the email. So we're going to add this here, and then we are also going to add this section for the email. All right, so when we start to change the email, the values of the email, or first name, last name, and the email, then we want to check this statement. So if this is correct, then we want this to be enabled. So we're going to also put that else. We're going to put that last section, that else. If it is not, we want to leave it disabled. Okay, that should be constant. We don't leave it disabled. All right, so let's end the line of code, and let's test this out. This looks good, so let's test this out. All right, so let's start to write in our values. I have auto-populated my fields, so this should work for a while, and as you can see, that has been enabled. Now let's take this out, and you can see there is an error and the button is disabled, so we cannot move forward unless this field has been satisfied. Now this field is satisfied, we can then move forward. So we can disable this, and you can see there's an error and this is still here. All right, so we need to go back and do that, and then we can click on the next. Right here we haven't connected that, so we need to connect this to click action, which is submit. All right, so we want to do a little bit of coding for this section as well. Okay, this is going to be very easy. So what we're going to do here is we're going to move again another step, and then we're going to use this submit button section, this submit button. So we're going to come over here, and we are going to say that when we click on our submit button, not submit again, when we click on this submit button, which is the onClick function over here, Then we want to be able to change the label of our submit button. So the label is going to be changed to something interactive. For example, submitting or please wait. So we're going to give the user an idea that our item is being submitted and we want him to wait. Okay, so when that is being clicked, that is going to happen. And then we're going to also add something else. All right, so we're going to add what happens after we have saved the items. So what happens after we have saved the item is we want to call our data sets. Our dataset ID is called dataset1. So I'm going to leave it as dataset1. I'm going to call it dataset1 and I'm going to say dot on after save. So what happens after we have saved our data set, after we have saved our content, is we want to change the label of our data of our button to submit. I think it's called submit. That is the original label. Let's take a look. Yes, so this is called submit. Now another thing we want to do is we just don't want to change the label, we also want to move to the success page. So we want to trigger our multi-state box to automatically move us or change state to this state here, to the submit success state. So under the submit, we're going to go to our job multi-state box ID here, gonna add that, and then we're going to change states and we're going to change that state to the submit success state. All right, so now this makes sense. All right, so this is going to happen after it has been submitted. Now remember that your data set could actually run into an error. So what do we do when the data set has run into an error? So what I want to do here is I want to first of all name this after save, and then I want to say this on error. When my data set runs into an error, what I want to do is to leave the ID the way it was. So let's change that to lowercase. I want to leave the ID. I'm going to say on error, which definitely happens sometimes. So you want to prepare for that. In case there's an error, we want to leave our submit button or change our submit button to submit, because when you click on that, since we have initiated the click action here, it's just going to leave our label to be please wait, and that's going to happen even though there's an error. So we have this field ready to be submitted. Now let's take a look at the first section. So I'm gonna add my details, and I'm gonna say that this is an interesting section. So and the state, we're gonna say Graham, and you know, as you can see that it's moving perfectly well, very clean interaction. So we have the employed, we're gonna say that Walter, and then let's submit. So when you click on submit, it tells you to wait, and then it brings you to the success page when we are done. Now we didn't do something here. Okay, when we move to the success page, we also want the progress bar to move with us. Okay, so we're going to bring that to 100. So that's what I'm going to add for this final section. I'm going to add the value of our progress bar to be 100 when we move after save. So we're going to do that here, and we're going to change that to 100. There is something very important that you need to know about forms. When you move between states, you stay in one position in your screen. Now what we want to do is to be able to scroll back up when we click on next or previous. So I'm going to add an anchor that moves with us. Okay, that makes that interaction very clean. Now this is going to be the last section of this tutorial. I'm sure you love this video, and I'm pretty sure you're going to have to incorporate this pretty soon. We want to add scroll to our anchor. So over here, remember the first button we have is next button. So I'm going to add this anchor. I'm going to say that the anchor, which is anchor 1, this is the ID dot scroll to, and then this is just the only function we need. All right, so I'm just going to copy this into all the buttons that I have, and I have a number of buttons over here, so this is easy. Then finally, I'm going to add this on the after save. So after saving our item, we want to scroll up as well. We want to scroll to the anchor, because this is going to change the states. Okay, so that means there is an interaction going on. All right, so now let's test out these advanced form that we have built. Now look how beautiful this looks, and look how interactive it allows us to make use of our items, and look at how that scrolled to the next part. So no matter what you do, if for example you scroll to the previous, it goes back up to where I added it to. All right, so let's use number 2 Baker. So number 2 Baker Street, and then we have Graham, which is the states. Now let's just add something here. Let's add Norway. Let's say Norway, and then let's add some numbers for our zip code. Then next, you see how that scrolled to that section. So let's say we are not employed, and then let's add some numbers as well. When we click on the submit, you can see that has brought us over here. Now this is just an amazing way of adding a form, an interactive multi-state form to your Wix website. This is amazing, and the code is super easy if you follow what the code does. Now guys, I'm sure you enjoyed this video. Do not forget to subscribe and also hit the like button if this video makes a lot of sense to you. I'm sure you're wondering how do we add the submit again button. This is going to be easy. I can actually do that right now. All we have to do is just to bring the button, or to bring the states back to our front state, and then also bring the progress bar back to our to the default, which is 0. So I'm going to do that very quickly. Right, so I've added a simple code that allows us to submit again. So I'm not going to test that because of time. I'm sure you already watched this video to this very moment, so thank you very much for viewing it. But this code is going to allow you to go back to the default, to the original first page, and it's also going to reduce the value of our progress bar to 0, and then scroll up if we move certain distance away from the scroll to page section. All right, so thank you very much. The link to this code is in the description. Don't forget to check it out, and see you in the next video.